One group that has voiced a strong opposition to the redistricting amendment entirely is Common Cause New York. They are chalking up today's ruling as a victory, but ultimately would like voters to strike down the proposition in November. Susan Lerner is the executive director of that organization. She is joining me now from New York City. Welcome back, Susan. It is good to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Liz.
Okay, so you got what you wanted, right? You got the judge to agree that the word independent in describing this particular entity is not accurate, and that the word should be struck from the description of this amendment on the ballot in November. So good.
Yes, definitely. And this is a clear validation from a neutral third party that what we have been saying, which is that this proposition just is not what it seems, is actually correct. It's not independent. It doesn't work the way proponents say it's going to. The voters should beware.
It's actually, the judge was quite strong in his decision, and to say that while the commission may independently create its own plan, the legislature ultimately has the final say, can make changes, can reject the plan. And so basically what you do is insert another step, but ultimately you don't change all that much. You tinker around the edges. That's how you see it?
That's exactly our concern. So, and we've seen this play out in various counties that have similar commissions. We've seen it play out in Erie County. We've seen it play out in Nassau County. You have a lot of time, you have a lot of taxpayer money which is spent, and then the results of the commission are thrown out and the legislature draws to its own advantage. That is not what the proponents claim is on the ballot, but it is indeed what's on the ballot. This is a rearrangement of a bad system, and in fact it makes it worse, because we've never had a requirement that there be political line drawing in our Constitution. If this were to pass, we're stuck with this lousy system for 50 to 100 years, and the voters shouldn't let that happen.
So there's a possibility of an appeal here. My understanding is that there has not been a decision made by the administration. It's definitely getting a little bit close to the election. I mean, don't we have an expedited timeline if in fact an appeal is made?
Exactly. If there is an expedited procedure, if an appeal were filed, it would move very quickly. I question whether there would be any utility to filing an appeal at all. The judge's decision was very straightforward, as you pointed out, very strong, and grounded in common sense. And I hope that the Board of Elections will save the taxpayer the time and the extra money that what I believe would be a futile appeal would cost.
Was your approach here informed by the situation that we saw with the casino amendment? Because that's where we really got started in seeing the administration word ballot amendments in such a way as to really sort of put a spin on it, for lack of a better saying. And that one was changed from the original wording that was proposed by the Attorney General, was changed subsequently, and then a lawsuit was brought to challenge it, but it was deemed too late in the process. So did you learn your lesson from that?
Very much so. We were quite concerned. I have to admit that the way in which the language that appeared on the ballot last year for the gambling amendment, how biased it was, it snuck by us in a very short time period that you have to protest. We believe that it's absolutely essential that anything that appears on the ballot has to be neutral, has to be a clear and honest statement of what's being proposed. Otherwise, the voters don't have a chance to make an intelligent decision. So we were definitely alerted to the possibility that there could be an attempt to put in language that was misleading or designed to entice the voters to cast a favorable vote. And so we were very alert and paying attention when the board made its determination at the beginning of August.
Is this a new phenomenon? I mean, now I've sort of covered state politics for about a decade plus. You've been around for a little bit longer than that. I mean, I can't recall previous administrations going to this extent, but then again, I haven't seen it all, obviously.
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing is that generally up until now, what's appeared on the ballot has been relatively technical, has been should a bond issue be allowed, should there be a change in a procedure relating to pensions. There seem to be small changes to existing programs. We haven't seen the kind of really large substantive issues like should gambling be permitted, or should we change our redistricting process to rearrange things but keep it the same. We haven't seen these big issues on the ballot.
It seems, though, that if you really want to make this kind of substantial change, that perhaps what you really ought to do is go the route of a constitutional convention. And I know that's sort of like the boogeyman, because a lot of people get upset when you talk about reopening the Constitution and all these things can happen, and maybe, you know, the forever wild in the Adirondacks will be a problem, or maybe the pension fund guarantee will be touched or tampered in some way. But it seems that a lot of these things are really wholesale changes and not, like you say, just tinkering.
Well, but Liz, there is another way in which to approach it, and that would be to have a full proceeding in the legislature with real hearings, an opportunity for the public to be heard, a legislative deliberative process to determine what the amendment should look like, and then educate the voters, provide them with real information, not just a short, opaque, hard to understand description on the ballot. Remember, both the gambling amendment and Prop 1, the redistricting amendment, were determined behind closed doors in a classic Albany maneuver without any public hearings, without any opportunity for the public to weigh in, or opponents or proponents to be sure that what was being placed in the Constitution was the best that it could be. And it's this same old Albany game that we're seeing, and which we think is absolutely wrong. And Prop 1 is a perfect example of what happens when it's the same old Albany game.
Okay, so this actually, though, has split the good government community. I mean, you are saying what you're saying very vehemently, challenge this in court, etc. But then on the other hand, you have Citizens Union, for example, which reiterated its support for Prop 1 earlier today after the judge's decision. I mean, also, ostensibly, the governor is supportive, but we haven't seen any spending on his side, nor have we heard much from him on this particular proposition, though of course he has his own election to worry about. I mean, when are we going to see a lot of campaigning, or will we even see a lot of campaigning by both sides of this argument?
Well, I don't know that there's going to be a significant amount of money spent on either side, but I think what we are going to see is increasing discussion. I think that certainly the no on Prop 1 side is going to run a public education and information campaign. It's going to be a campaign that's designed to move voters. It may not be the way in which, you know, a candidate who has several $1 million communicates with the voters, but we are certainly going to get the word out, and I believe that voters will know about this proposition and why it's important to vote against it, vote no on Prop 1 by the November ballot.
And just also, before we run out of time, is it possible that you will seek to make changes or advocate for changes to the whole system of getting ballot language onto the ballot, getting amendment language onto the ballot? Because clearly there's not a lot of room for public comment.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that is something that we are looking at. We've been working with our colleagues at NYPIRG, and we've had discussions with different members of the Assembly, and I think that in 2015 we're going to see an attempt to reform the process by which ballot language is determined, to make it open and to give the public an opportunity to be sure that what goes on the ballot is a fair and accurate statement of what they're being asked to decide.
Well, Susan, we will be on the lookout for that, and we will be on the lookout for the public education campaign as well. We'll speak more about this as the general election draws near. I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Liz.